Hello, Sterile Processing Universe. I'm Lindsay Brown with Beyond Clean, and I would like to welcome you to the sixth and final session of today's Uncharted Waters, Equipping Sterile Processing with a Roadmap to Compliance virtual conference. This final panel discussion will be about educating on water quality from the very first drop. And we have a rock star panel of speakers for you today. I'd like to welcome to the stage Jameed Billingsley. He's the Managing Director of Surgical Services at Advantage Support Services. Angela Llewellyn is the Director of Development and Research for Advantage Support Services. She has a notable 20 years of experience in surgical services and is considered a subject matter expert, along with Jameed. Jameed has been a sterile processing and surgical inventory management expert. He's had an incredible, he's made his rounds in the education realm, the standardization realm, and implementing process improvements. I'd also like to welcome Ana Castillo Gutierrez. She is the sterile processing educator at Texas Children's Hospital. In her role, Ana works closely with quality and infection control departments to create simple to follow processes that help bridge the gap between quality and efficient processes, something everyone should be interested in the sterile processing field. Unfortunately, we're missing Tamara today. Tamara, hope we're having a very safe flight, but we're really excited to talk with Jameed, Angela, and Ana today. Joining for this panel discussion once again, as your host, is Hank Balch. So without further ado, I'd love to hand it over to Hank.
Awesome. Thanks, Linz. And yeah, welcome our panelists, ladies, and then Jameed, whenever he's able to jump in here with us. We're going to be practical in this panel. We've got a ton of science, a ton of standard updates, a ton of processing case studies that were covered in the earlier sessions today. Very important information. And so for the audience, who's just tuning into this session, maybe you just got off work and this is the only one that you could catch live, really want to encourage you to go back through to catch as many of those previous sessions as you can, just because it's a fantastic foundation for much of what we're going to be talking about in this session, which is applying all of this knowledge and education that we've been talking about for the last few hours here to the front lines. And so, as you can see, the title of this talk is Educating on Water from the Very First Drop. And it is like, what does this look like? What does all this information look like coming out of TIR 34, out of SD 108, and actually into our departments and into our technicians' heads and out their fingertips? So that's the takeaway for today. But as we get started, I want to let you ladies give a little bit more introduction, background to yourself, if you want to add anything to what Lindsay said. And then also I want to get your answer to a little warm-up question here about the first thing that you remember learning about water in sterile processing. And I'm going to answer that myself first before I kick it over to you, Angie, first. The first thing that I remember learning as a new technician was temperature of my water in my sink and decontam in order for the enzymatic to work. Because back then we were using a particular enzymatic that required a particular temperature of the water. And I just remember having that drilled into my head as a new technician to look at that monitor and make sure that that water temperature is above this temperature or it's not going to work. So that's mine. What about you, Angie?
Well, I transitioned to sterile processing a little different than most in that I came from the OR straight into sterile processing. So the techs were really teaching me a ton and kind of went through the manual to learn about it. So I initially learned a little bit about the science of water because all I knew to look at was the certification book. And then the technicians kind of introduced me to, okay, this is how we do it. This is how you get it done. So it was a little different transition, but I think now that we know what we know, and we'll say this a little bit later too, is several of the users that sit on an aiming committee jumped into standard working group 95 or standard 108 to learn about water because an enormous amount of science. So hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit about that. But I think a lot of the science has already been talked about a lot. But really, how are we going to implement this into our department? This is the big question. What's the next step?
I love that. And your experience, although as you said, it's a little different in just your career progression. It's actually, there's a lot of folks out there that probably learn about water the same way through the textbook initially, right? Because they're going through these training programs as new students. And that's the first introduction that they're getting to the concepts of water is straight out of that textbook. So, that's a great insight there of that, many times it comes first book knowledge, and then you get in there for the experiential knowledge as well, not the other way around. So, yeah, that's great. We'll go next here to Anna. Do you have anything else to add to your intro? And then, what's your earliest memory about water quality education in SPD?
So I'll offer just a little bit. I think not a lot of people know about this from my background, but my parents happen to be jewelers. But the very first thing that I learned in sterile processing about water was the temperature, like you mentioned, the temperature of the water. But in my case, with the little bit of background that I had from my parents, it was mixing some of the chemistries, what not to mix and what to mix, and just some of the staining things. So a lot of the information that I got from the instrument specialist exam, I kind of had already had that in my background a little bit, because I knew when customers came into our parent shop, I knew, oh, you've been using this chemical on this metal or this jewelry. So it was a little bit of a weird concept that I knew that, but it's definitely useful in sterile processing, and it's something that I quickly picked up when I was in there.
That's awesome. I thought at first you would say that you learned about ultrasonic cleaning, because don't they do that a lot? Kind of like the jewelry setting, they'll do like ultrasonic of the rings and stuff.
Yeah, we have one at home.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. All right. That's awesome. And then I saw Jamid, you got in right on time, man. Didn't even miss the intro, so that's great. The questions here that we're setting up is kind of, what is your earliest memory of water quality as you got into the industry, Jamid? Do you have any memories that you can recall for that?
I can. I don't know if you can see me. So I think my initial...
Oh, we lost him.
Oh, we lost him.
So we'll go back to Jamid's memories once he gets internet figured out. He's having a rough internet day over there, which I think we all can understand how frustrating that can be. So let's jump in to the very beginning of this water quality conversation on, like, where do we get those information, or where do we get that information, right? So Angie kind of mentioned it in her intro, that a lot of this information comes from the certification textbook, the manual, but there's other sources of information as well. So at the very beginning, just talking about what is out there to know and where is that stuff at, Angie? What are some of the places that you've seen in your own experience, or that you see folks in the industry kind of going to start getting some of this information?
Well, usually our experience is usually with instrument audits that water has affected those instruments. And so some of the things we initially, when we started learning about water and all the effects and how really that chemistries really do affect those instruments, is doing those audits if there's staining, discoloration, and different things. And then the facility would bring in a water expert pertaining to steam quality, or pertaining to different aspects from the boiler. What we learned first, let me say, is each specialist that came into the facility had a specialty. There's not one specialist or expert for water that can tell me from A to Z and walk me through it all. I think there's certain ones that can tell you certain things. And so what we learned walking through, we just left a hospital in Georgia about a month ago and did a walk through, you know, from the pipes, the municipalities, from the street to the pipes and all the way through, and all the stopgaps all the way through to the boiler. And so I really got to learn a lot more. So I think the resources initially for us as users learning about water, if I had to start at the beginning again, it would be TIR 34. There's so many resources out there, but it's really going to come down to what that technical information report says, and that's the guideline we have right now. I mean, 108 is coming, and it's really going to expand a lot of things about that's on the TIR. But if we just begin at the beginning, which is the TIR, that's the #1 resource I would recommend right now.
And so, you know, Angie, you brought up kind of two resources, right? You know, TIR, obviously, that's a great place to start. That's a good call out. And then you mentioned all the different experts, right? The specialists in these fields that really know down to the depths of what's going on in the pipes, what's the municipality issues going on, what's the impact in the sterilizers or in the washers. So I just want to highlight that, you know, for folks too, is if you're looking around out there in the industry and you see folks kind of nerding out on these particular topics, you know, they just won't shut up about water in your washers. Don't, you know, say, yeah, I'm not interested in that. Like, you should mark that person down as, hey, I may need to call that person at some point in my career because they may have some answers for me on these very, very specific nuance challenges or breakdowns, you know, so that's a good highlight. What about you, Anna? Anything else that you would add in kind of that foundational body of knowledge of water quality that you would want to make sure that folks are aware of is out there?
Yeah, I think one of the very first things is we don't know what we know until we need to know it.
That's right.
And so it's super important that we understand what our actual policies within the facility state, how to get in contact with the resources and the people that we need to get in contact with whenever something does happen. That way, when something does happen, we're not surprised, or we know exactly what we need to do. But I think when we finally get to that point where an event happens, or maybe your municipality had an issue and they shut down the water and there's not enough pressure, you know, it tends to affect a lot more than just the water quality. And I know we've been talking about that a lot, but it messes with the pressure and being able to open and close the sterilizer doors and a whole bunch of other things that these companies kind of set up, I guess, their equipment concerning water. And it's important that not only you know, but that the rest of the people in the facility understand that it doesn't just affect the water quality. And yeah, you can go ahead and change out the filter in my sterilizers and in the ARs and all of these other equipment, but my door isn't closing, right? You have all these pressure issues afterwards that need to get fleshed out, and nothing will work until all of those things are resolved. So I think being slightly knowledgeable on what goes on with our equipment, but also educating the other people throughout the facility that I need this to also happen, that's important too.
Yeah, so a practical takeaway, I'm just going to start throwing these out as we drop this in this session, you know, for folks to take back and actually do something on Monday when they come back to work, is take a look at your current policies and procedures. We're going to talk about that here a little bit more later, but look them up if they're online, especially. Do a little search and find, and just search for the word water and see how many policies and procedures you've got that's referencing water, just like what Anna says, because you want to know, what's your current policy say? You may be surprised, you may not have hardly any that are referencing water quality, and so that's also a good thing to know. And then the other two call outs was don't keep this knowledge to yourself, and that's going to be a big part of the takeaway here is it's great if the manager or the supervisor or their lead tech or just a really, really nerdy technician wants to be the water person in their department. It's great if you know everything. It's really bad if you're the only one that knows everything, because if you get sick or if you move on, anything happens, then you're really putting your team at risk. And then the third takeaway is that piece that Anna mentioned about equipment and the impacts that that has. And so kind of knowing who to call, maybe that's that third takeaway of, hey, if something goes on with my sterilizer door or with my washer door, right? Who am I going to call up and down the chain? If it's facilities, that's great. If it's clinical engineering, that's great, but is there anyone on the manufacturer side that you kind of need that call list available as it relates to this water quality issue? So those are really good practical takeaways. Jameed, so you got set up here, and I'm going to throw you over. I don't want to miss out on your first introduction to water education, so we're going to go back to that just real quick. What's your earliest memories? Baby Jameed out there in the sterile processing, like surgical tech space. What's that first thing you remember, like, this is an interesting thing that I need to know about water in SPD?
That's a great question. So I knew a little bit about water and the importance of steam. I thought more from steam because of the surgical background, working with field sterilizers and that kind of thing. But unfortunately, like a lot of people in our world, I'm going to pull the curtain back a little bit. I didn't realize the importance of water until we had a water issue. And what I really want people to take away from this presentation is, don't wait until you have an issue, whether that issue is a steam problem, a water problem, or a new standard coming out. Because I think a lot of the kind of anxiety around this is those kind of things are driving it. And I'm going to echo what the other presenters are saying is, hey, this is our opportunity. This is our opportunity to do a QA on the tray that's called water, right? Here's our chance to take the tray that's called water and QA it and say, is the count sheet right? Are we testing frequently enough? Do we know enough about water? Because if we think there's some magic person that can take us all the way from the start to the end, like Angie said, people are experts in silos. And typically the problem is never one issue. It's never, oh, here's the magical issue. Here's this one filter that's messed up the water for the whole. There's a variety of issues. And we think plant engineering knows more than they know. We think the washer, sterilizer manufacturers know more than they know. And there's always multiple factors. And the best thing that we can do is start educating ourselves now so that when the event happens, whether it's that standard or actual water problem, we know as much as we can possibly know, and we share that knowledge through our whole department. So it's not like we think of water like a magic car. We just want to get in and drive. We don't think about what we're doing is affecting our water quality, what the municipality is doing, what plant engineering is doing. So that's what I want people to take away is like, let's start thinking about water and talking about things in TIR that talk about testing and what we're testing for and how you make good water. So that's kind of my spiel on that part.
I'm going to steal that phrase, QA the water tray. So I'm just going to publicly say that Hank's going to steal that phrase. I'll give you, if I remember, I'll try to give you attribution for
That's okay. I stole so many things from you, Hank, over the years.
Okay. Great. I want to go back to Anna now. So like we've set the stage, right? Like Jimmy said, hey, this is an opportunity. This is one of those kind of things, though, where like we're choosing the word opportunity strategically because we know it's like a challenge. It's like opportunities for improvement. Like everyone knows what you're saying, but it is an opportunity here. So let's take advantage of this opportunity. And, Anna, like, where do we start with this then? And maybe like, let me ask it a different way. Who is the who? Because Jameed mentioned like we all need to start looking around, taking responsibility for this, but who's the who that's going to take TIR 34, ST 108, the Uncharted water session just happened this Friday with all of these wonderful information speakers that are coming out. Who in our departments is going to take this or should be taking this information, then bringing it into the department and starting to make it tangible. And maybe kind of a second question outside of the who is, what are going to be the challenges that you're already seeing with, bringing TIR 34 and that information into SPD and then getting it to the front lines?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to start here. The first thing you want to understand is there's a difference between learning for a growth mindset and learning because it's a required thing that you need to do, like a task within the department. I think the information sharing is really, really great, but if you overload certain people, certain staff with too much information, you're going to lose them, and then it's not going to be practical or applicable to them. And so I think as an educator, I would start with limiting the amount of information that's delivered and starting with making sure that they have what they need to get started and then build on it. I think a lot of us tend to want to do everything all at once because it's a requirement, and that's okay. But we have to be mindful of how we educate it so that it's applicable and useful information. The second part to that is who's responsible for making sure that who delivers that information, or how do we put it together? And I think sharing that load is important. If you're the only expert that, let's say you attended all of these amazing sessions and then you went back and you presented it to your leader's going to be looking at you saying, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? And I think the answer
That's right.
is,
You just volunteered yourself.
yeah. And I think the way you come about it is there's this great information, and I think we should all start looking into it. And I think I can put together a meeting so that we can talk about it and see who needs to be responsible for what part of the project. I think it needs to be very clearly worded the way that you deliver it, even if you're not a leader. If you have the information, share it, but make sure that everyone understands that I'm bringing the information and we're going to share it together because it's a large project or it's not going to work.
Yeah, that is extremely powerful and personal. I don't know if you saw me in the last session, but I was getting a little anxious and overwhelmed with all of the nuance and details that, are coming out of this ST 108 and the expectation. I believe very strongly that water quality and SPD is SPD's responsibility, not exclusively, but we can't just say that's not our job. Our job starts, with the instruments, right? No, water it's the heartbeat of our department, so we're going to have to figure it out. But all that information, coming in, it's very easy to get overwhelmed as a leader, not to mention, to your point, as a technician. So carving that out into what do they need to know today? Can we do this in consumable chunks, like you mentioned, to get them moving forward in the right direction? I think that's very, very helpful. And I want to go back to Jamid here on that kind of, the temptation may be sometimes when we learn things about the industry and information to keep that to ourselves as kind of like a territorial kind of thing, or I don't know, maybe job security. So how do you break it down to say, hey, no, we're learning these things for the good of everyone, like what Anna said, but then also not put yourself in that scenario of, hey, I'm going to be the water savior for the department, and I'm the only one that can help us because I'm not sharing all the nuance and insight with everyone else. How do you kind of democratize that?
So that's a great question, and I love how Anna put it. You have to have responsibility, specific education, right? So maybe a new tech during orientation doesn't need to memorize all the tolerances for CFMs and calcium, right? That may not be a part of it. But I want you to consider that the education that has to happen is not just in sterile processing, because to your point, we're going to be relying on multiple departments: infection prevention, the operating room, surgical services, plant operations, to achieve this goal. And I say you're going to have to book club it at some level, right? Because you have to start off. There's information about water in the CRCST, CIS, and CHL manuals. I highly recommend that instead of holding back to try to digest that whole ST 108, that you get TIR 34. And I'm not a salesman for Amy, but it is significantly less expensive than a standard because it's a TIR. And start book clubbing that thing and saying, are we doing this? Because part of the problem with education and operations is right now we have a patriarchal relationship with our plant operations in most hospitals. Like they handle that, like you said, they handle that
Right.
water stuff until it goes wrong. And if you're unfortunate enough for something to go wrong and you start talking to them about it, you start realizing, wow, these guys don't know as much about water as I do, right? So we're assuming that they know all this stuff. So really, the process is educate yourself, but you have to share that education because you and I, when we were writing tests, we could read the same Amy passage and get two different meanings. So having a multidisciplinary team for water specifically is going to allow that communication and education and planning to happen. So that way you guys are kind of book clubbing and then saying, hey, this is what I see here. What do you think? And then your plant operation says, oh, we can't do that. Or we may need to buy more equipment to meet that. Or infection prevention may say, this is really important. We have to do that. So you have to share that education and that wealth. I'm going to venture to say there's nobody who knows the whole thing. And I know that because I'm on a committee, because there's certain parts where the experts from the industry are talking, and there's certain times when us end users are talking and they're like, oh, I didn't even know that. So it's really before we can develop education, we have to make sure that we're communicating and saying, this is what I understand. What do you understand? And that's a form of education. So sharing information with our team members so they can start thinking about water, because the next water czar, the next water guru might have just started in your department 3 months ago. But if you're not sharing information about water and starting those discussions, they may not be able to contribute. They may have parents that were jewelers, and they may know more about water than you ever thought. So those are the opportunities when you start sharing, job specific education to spark that innovation and spark that desire to be like, hey, we want to know more about water. And if that's the culture of the department, you're going to be in a better place than, oh boy, here comes this standard that's going to wallop us. So, I mean, just starting that kind of culture, I think, can be the foundation of education for water.
I want to go back to something that Angie brought up and, throw this back to you, Angie, because you mentioned like one of those sources of information at the beginning is just an audit, like getting out there, asking questions, going through the checklist, making sure that you're aware of the status quo before you start getting into like, what are we changing? What are we doing? So I wonder if you can talk me through a little bit more about how you have seen those audits kind of spark the collaboration that Jameed's talking about, right? Because they're a great excuse to get people in the same room that otherwise wouldn't have ended up in the same room. But now you have an audit, now you have some information that you can share and then spark this. So how has that impacted, these conversations and facilities that you're seeing out there in the field?
Tremendously. It's impacting it tremendously. And the teams that it brings together is the manufacturer, even the consumables for the mechanical washer. Right. That guy's in the room, right? Because the chemistries and the water and all of that. So
because he's getting blamed if it's not working, right?
Yes, he is.
So he's like, I want to be in
the room.
That's true.
He is in the room. But also, what Jameed and Anna said, plant engineers and facilities, and all of the people behind the scenes that don't really walk through necessarily a decontamination area where most of the water is used initially, right? But what Jameed and I talked about with the company is how are we going to approach water moving forward. One of the reasons we moved into, jumped into the standard 108, and it is if we took 34 and broke it down, if I was the manager, right, how do I make this usable for users? If I'm the decontam tech, where am I going to begin? And those in the field technicians, right, the people that really make it happen at the technician level need to be part of the walkthrough, the rounding, and the audits, because they're going to let you know. It might say this in TIR, we should monitor this, or we should, evaluate this level, but we don't have the equipment, or we don't have this, that maybe managers and administration don't know. This is not doable. So I think a lot of times the technician level needs to be very involved in the audits. And as you round, we break out the TIR and walk through each step of the TIR. Like literally, I went through the TIR when I was developing all this, and just typed in find user or testing, or, what's my responsibility as a decontamination technician about water, and just begin at the beginning. And then, like Anna said, break it out. I think the next thing, it is in phases, and it's a little bit like some of the things we should huddle about is just, what do all those acronyms mean? Or what is the definition of utility water versus critical water? Like, let's just begin at the beginning. And even if you did, 3, 10-minute huddles a week, to add up to 30 minutes a week, you are initiating water and the process and the science of water with your team.
I love that. That practical, that is like the definition of practical right there, like weaving it in to your daily huddles in a chunk by chunk basis. It goes back, to a great takeaway that Jameed, brought up too, that I forgot to highlight, is that book club idea. That I know way back, probably 2013, 2014, I wrote an article about creating a book club, go through the AMI ST79, and what that would look like to do as a team. Going back to what you said, Angie, including the technicians, right? So like Jameed said, you don't know who's on your team right now that could be the future water czar of your department. They're just waiting for the opportunity to dive in head first and get really super excited about a topic. They got some background like Anna did, right? And they're hungry to make an impact on the team. And maybe this water quality committee or that book club idea, that's what's going to spark that. And then you have an advocate to drive a lot of these programs and changes and ideas about the education that we're bringing up. So I think that's a good takeaway, again, for folks who are tuning in looking for, like, what do I do with all this information that they just poured out on a Friday afternoon? Well, carve it up, look at your huddles. What are those small definitional things where you can start creating the foundational knowledge that, when you say utility water, everybody in the department knows what you're talking about. And I don't care how long you've been in the industry, I can learn a thing or two about water definitions myself. So I read those things just like everybody else is. Keep on educating, because it's just so much information. I want to go to Anna on some of these kind of practical, best practice integrations, right? So like Angie brought it up, hey, we can put these in our huddles. Obviously, as we're taking in new technicians, there's a couple of opportunities in that intake to begin introducing them to water. And I'm wondering if you can highlight, some of those areas and opportunities from that educational perspective where we should say, hey, they're not getting through this phase until we're giving them a couple of drops here about water info as they continue to progress in through that educational process.
I think presenting it as a competency, I use the word competency, but I think just training in general. So when people start to onboard with your facility, one of the very first things that you should introduce them to, obviously, is your policies and procedures, so that if someone asks them, they know exactly how to speak to it. So maybe it's not tangible just yet, but they at least know what they should be doing. Afterwards, once they're in the actual department, it should be broken down. And I think most facilities and most departments probably start their techs off in decontamination, where the majority of the water is, just like Angie had mentioned. If you are applying the training step by step, for example, you're obviously going to start with the sink system. If you're telling them the temperatures and you're walking them through those concepts, that's a competency in itself, making sure that they actually know the detergent temperatures and the ranges. And then if you have a certain, it can quickly become overwhelming. For example, I have a perfect example of a brand new hire that came from one facility over to our facility, and everyone tells me that it's night and day. And specifically in decon, for example, we have our sink system. Our sink system is connected to one type of detergent. They understand that that detergent has a certain temperature, but then you move over to the third sink. So you're still in the sink system, third sink. You're now talking about critical water. They have no idea what critical water is sometimes. And so you have to stand there and explain to them what it is, and you give them the separate options. From there, you move over to the ultrasonic washer, and your ultrasonic washer may or may not have that same detergent. So now they have to learn a separate temperature range for that detergent, because using an ultrasonic washer requires certain different instrumentation that requires a different detergent. And so you're getting yourself into maybe 5 or 6 competencies by the time that you leave the sink system and your ultrasonic washer. And that's just half, not even half of the steps in decontamination. So again, it's quickly overwhelming. And I think if you take them again step by step and you have someone specific training to that for new hires, they're going to be established pretty well in the long run. We can't. I'll put it this way. I once lost a job offer because my answer to how would you onboard a group of people without slowing down, and my answer was, you can't. You have to do this individually. And they didn't like that answer. Well, someone liked my answer finally because it works. It does work. It has to be individual.
Well, and we're going to actually have a very similar conversation during the HSPA event, coming up here in a few months too. So about the speed, education, training part of things. So we're going to pick up that theme again then. But you brought up, very important point there about they're getting introduced to water from day one. Whether they have been educated on it is a whole different ball game. What do they need to know? What's kind of those thresholds? Because like we've talked about before, Jameed, in the previous sessions, the depth of understanding, just like Angie said at the very beginning, you can make your life and career water quality. Like you can do this 24/7 and not run out of things to learn and to know about how water acts and reacts and everything else. So we're never, as sterile processing technicians and educators, we're never going to get to the bottom of everything that we need to know or could know about water. But there's got to be that kind of threshold of these are the practical things that you are likely to encounter in your daily job that you're going to need to be able to speak to and understand how to troubleshoot. I know your team does a lot of emphasis on policies and procedures, Jameed. Is there anything in this kind of ST108 conversation and then practically again with policies and procedures that you would kind of highlight and encourage people to start looking at their policies or, looking at certain procedures to say, hey, now's a good time to dust them off, download them, start doing some red lines and some updates in preparation for what is going to come here?
Oh, yeah, that's a fastball down the middle, Hank. The first thing is, what are you referencing in your policy about water? Right? Because if you're referencing TIR 34, then you should have TIR 34, right? Because there's not enough information in the other standards right now to really write a true water policy. The question that goes before that is, do you have a water policy? Because if you don't have one already, the takeaway is, hey, go back to your leader, or if you're the leader, say, hey, we probably need to start working on our water policy, right? Because so that we can understand the things, right? Like Anna brought up some great points. The water temps for the washer are different than the water temps for the cart washer. Are you testing the temperature of the water in the cart wash? Are you testing the temperature of the water in the washer decontaminator, right? Because guess what? If you're not, and you're throwing away your rolls of paper, how can you prove that those items reach high level or low level or intermediate disinfection? So it's really, like starting off with the information that's already in the central service manuals and that kind of stuff. But to progress, the really thing is take that step back and think about, what are we doing that involves water? Okay. Is that in our competencies now? Do we just say, like Anna said, do we say, fill up the sink with water? Or do we say, here's the temperatures that you're looking for with water? Do we just say, test the washers? Or do we say, here's the temperatures, the minimum temperatures that water needs to achieve sanitization, disinfection? This is why the cart washer temperature is lower than the temperature in the washer disinfector. When you start asking team members about water that uses steam for sterilization, and you start saying, well, what's the difference between 270 and 275? Like, why is 275 just 1 minute difference? And how does that translate? When you start asking questions about steam purity, right? And again, do you have those numbers posted anywhere? You know how simple and how quick accreditation visit would go if you had your most recent steam quality and water quality reports posted in one of those laminated folders on the wall. And guess what?
They're not going to go quick. It's going to slow down because they're going to be like, I've never seen that before.
Right. And woe be unto the next place they survey, right? Yeah. But the point is, if you want your team to start thinking about stuff, like make a visual aid. That's a 5S thing. Hey, here's one of your team members say, hey, it's February and we haven't had our water testing. I thought we did it every 3 months, or I thought we did it every 6 months or whatever. And then that'll start sparking that innovation. But to your point, looking at wherever water is a part of the process, starting all the way from point of use and transportation, and thinking, what about this is important? What about the pre-rinse? When we say a cold water pre-rinse, what is cold water? Is cold a definition? And so when you start talking about those things and the cycles in the washer and what's going on in the ultrasonic, what temperature are you trying to achieve in the ultrasonic, and what's the difference between a regular ultrasonic temperature and a thermal disinfection, right? We're doing robotics and we're using terms like thermal disinfection, but then if you ask the team members, what temperature is thermal disinfection start? I don't know. So how can you QA the receipt? How can you ensure that happened? So just taking that metacognition step and thinking about, stop focusing just on ST108. What are the things that we're using water for right now? What are we using utility water? What are we using critical water for? And then what information do we need to start educating on? And then when you start doing policies, you start saying, well, if it didn't reach this temperature, then we need to rerun it. If it didn't reach this temperature, if we didn't do this. And when you start talking about that water quality or steam quality measurements that typically are not defined in the policies, then you can get together with plant operations and say, should we do this right now we're doing it once a year, or sometimes we're doing it never. Should we do it now and then? I think one of the previous presenters talked about the impact of seasonal changes on steam quality. And so if your testing schedule doesn't take that into effect, we had a hospital that every year they were like, every year when we go from winter to spring, we have wet packs. Well, I think we can figure out what the problem is. So those are the kind of things that you should start thinking about and looking at your policies and see, do they spell those out? So not just for you, but for when you move on to become the vice president of Beyond Clean, when you move on to become a congresswoman, then they won't say, well, Anna had all that knowledge. Nope, Anna left a water policy that spells out all the stuff that we should be looking for. So that would be my suggestion, not to wait till 108, because 108 is gonna really kick your tail if you don't have a water policy already.
So I would love, is just one of the practical networking steps out of this conference and event is for people to get connected, not only with the speakers that have been presenting today and being on the panel, including you guys, but also with each other. If you're tuning in here and you see any of these social media posts about these various sessions, reach out and start sharing those templates, those policy templates, those procedure templates. If you're working on those kinds of things with each other, you put a lot of work in and effort in. That goes exactly to what Jimmy is talking about. Is like if you move on that next big opportunity in your career, and you're taking all this inside information with you, then you're really missing out on that multi-generational, if you will, handoff of knowledge that. From manager to manager, from technician to technician, that we can continue handing off so that we're actually building a higher and higher into best practice, and not every time we get a new manager, now we're going to start at zero and build this whole thing again because the manager didn't tell anyone what was going on. There's no policies that are saved on the OneDrive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's hugely important. And again, I want to encourage everyone to connect here. If you got water information, insights, templates that you can share, start kind of crowdsourcing these, and let's engage on that organic level to be prepared, like Jameed said, and not wait until 108 comes and then you're like, oh crap, now we're really under the gun. So yeah, that's good feedback. I want to go to you, Angie, and this is a question on kind of practically what I've seen, at least from my experience. You may have different experience, but it's a question about why water quality education information historically has ended up on kind of the outskirts of everything else we got going on in sterile processing. Because to everyone's point, this information is out there. It's in the certification manuals. TIR 34 is not new. And yet it has taken something like ST 108 to get us all talking about it. And so why is that temptation so common for it to just kind of move to the peripheral, and then we're just focusing on, processing instruments and checking off boxes?
Well, I think we're concentrating on processing instruments and checking off boxes because that's all we can do. We are all in the weeds, right? And if you're lucky enough to be in Houston with Anna and have an educator for a big hospital system, then there's a little more organization and distribution of knowledge all around, right? We share the wealth. But so many hospitals just don't have the opportunity to have an Anna or a designated FTE designated as an educator. It's usually the manager trying to fit it in when they can. I think it's the time constraints. And what is happening is that we're not concentrating on water. Well, we're concentrating on all the things we can right now to get the instruments to the first case of tomorrow. And the organization, the support they have from the C-suite, a lot of times that's what we see. One of the things I wanted to say that applies to this is we just interviewed a fella that runs endoscopy center in Richmond, in Virginia. And when ST91 came out, and everybody in his department was like, oh man, what's going to change? What do we have to do now? There was no change when ST91 came out to the practices and how it would affect the technicians, because the technicians were already doing above best practices. So when 91 came out, it didn't impact them. And the same with 108 and what's coming on. Why didn't we concentrate on water? We're concentrating on all that we can with the support we have from our administration, with the lack of staff, with turnover of managers, and ultimately that impacts the culture. You know, I think Damien and some other couple people before in this conference talked about culture. It really impacts the culture of, are we just always in the weeds and putting fires out? Or are we able to really go through a process and develop a system and designate some leads and some people that are delegated certain things that really, you know, many hands makes the load light.
I think that's absolutely right. You know, no surprise, right? We just don't have the time. It's not that that anyone would argue proactively to say, "Hey, water doesn't matter." I think it is. I think the impact of water has maybe been underappreciated through the years of, you know, the pitting, the staining. I've been into this now, you know, so many years that anytime anyone asks about staining or pitting, the first place I go is water. And I say, well, you probably
Sure.
got a water situation going on, you know? But
Sure.
it's taken some years and exposure to these kind of conversations that we're talking about today to get there. So I know that is the reality. And that's that kind of brings me here to maybe one of our last questions. We'll see how long we spend on it. And it's the practical question of, okay, everyone on this panel, everyone in the industry, everyone on ST 108, the committee, everybody out there understands that water is important. We got a huge opportunity, like Jameed said, to do some big things and impact the industry today and impact the department today in terms of water. But the question is, where do we start? And like we like to do at Beyond Clean, I want to ask, you know, the big ideas. And these don't have to be like, you know, national projects as much as like outside of the box. What are some creative things or approaches that we can do to try to tackle the gap, to provide those resources out there that we don't have, you know, 5,000 different managers out there trying to figure it all out all by themselves and do it their own way? How do we kind of crowdsource this knowledge and not only tell them this is the standard, but, you know, also give some tools and support for how to get there? Is it, I threw this out, like, do we create roving bands of water educators that we just deploy around the industry, and that's all they're doing out there is, you know, teaching people about water in contexts like this? I think Angie and Jameed, you're kind of turning into roving water educators yourselves these days, I think, because I see you talking and, you know, teaching a lot about this topic here recently. Do we create, you know, more targeted kind of specialized education, like micro credentials, maybe specifically around the topic of water quality and sterile processing? Do we create specialist positions in our departments or maybe in like larger health systems, right? Like you mentioned, you know, not everyone gets an ANA. That's right. But, you know, this water quality topic, I know educators are probably looking around there like, well, don't look at me because I also don't have enough time to tackle all of this thing too. Like, where do we go? So maybe Jameed, I know you're a dreamer by nature. So start us off. Like, what are some of these ideas that can help us get here?
Frankly, without self-promoting both of our companies, we're going to have to take this bull by the horn because, you know, I heard one of the presenters say there's a bunch of water quality experts. Ask hospitals that have water problems, is that the case, right? Because I think people are experts in their silo. I know about the Steris machine that uses water. Oh, you're not using the Steris machine? Well, I can't help you. And that's not a knock on Steris. I'm just saying how the expertise from the start of the instrument cycle to the end of the instrument cycle is not always there. And so it is going to be up to us to create some micro credentials, some courses, some hard black and white courses that I can validate if I know enough about it. And to your point, if I have a large system, I probably need a water czar, right? I need a water czar that can go around and QA the testing because this is not a surprise and this is not breaking a non-confidentiality agreement. There's going to be a lot more water testing that's going on now. And probably you're not doing enough water testing. And even facilities that are compliant with TIR 34's water testing is not being done by the technicians in sterile processing and not often being reported up through the manager of sterile processing. So this has a potential. Remember, once it becomes the standard, the Joint Commission, DMV, CMS, and the FDA are all on the water committee. So if you don't think they're going to start surveying to that, you're going to be in for a surprise. So we got to get out in front of that. And so our responsibility, our take is we're learning a lot on this committee, but from the end user perspective, we're saying, what was just said are we not seeing when we do our audits? So it is going to take kind of a combination approach, some of online available courses, some more forums like this. This really, really is important for our industry. This is like, for you to come out and do this is very important for our industry, because there's a bunch of, when we go to hospitals and we ask about water, they don't know. And so I would be, how many hospitals, Angie, do we go to that have a water quality program? I don't think any of them.
Let me just interrupt, because it's not all, it kind of generalized, right? I did audit a hospital in North Dakota, and that manager was all over it and showed me month by month by month, page by page by page, her water testing and where they took it and how she did it. And they were very in tune with the water, probably because they live in North Dakota and there's some issues with the water, I guess. But so there is a lot of people out there that really are getting engaged with the water and have been testing. But for all of those that are not, excuse me, I don't think it's a fear approach of, oh my gosh, what's coming one away? I think it really is let's find out our culture and how we, right now in our department, so we can get ready.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. I love hearing, I know there's users out there across the country that are already on top of these things. Just like Angie said, they're already committed, they're believers. Maybe they've already been involved in the previous AME committees and meetings, like around, TIR 34, for instance. And especially if you have that alignment that's been mentioned a couple times with your engineering team, and they're believers and they're on board and they want to make sure that they're checking those boxes, like that makes it so much easier to push the needle a couple of notches forward than it is to go kind of from zero, get that alignment, you build that alignment, build that trust, and move your facilities engineering team, your plant team over a little closer to you, and get all your manufacturer partners and do the same thing. That's going to be the scenario for a lot of our departments out there, but not all of them. I'm curious, we got a couple minutes left, Anna. What are some of your dreams or big ideas out of the box for filling in these gaps that we've been talking about today?
I think not just for the water quality, but I think I can honestly say, and since you started Beyond Clean, we kind of have found that there's a lot of SPD nerds out there that are just curious about a lot of things, and they just absorb a lot of information. And I one of my biggest things that I kind of would like to see one day is in infection control. There should be a position that kind of helps these hospitals establish anything to do with sterile processing. The entire hospital system usually has to do, they have different things with water, transporting soiled instruments. There's a whole bunch of things that involve sterile processing. Why not have a specialist in sterile processing within infection control that can help the entire facility without creating silos, and that one person would be able to bring everyone who needs to be involved together. And I think that's something that's can be easily established within a healthcare system, especially in infection control, because we know that there's a need for it. And so I think there's more of a viable opportunity for a position to be posted in that fashion there than in sterile processing.
Yeah, that and quality. I know there's more and more health systems out there that they're kind of creating these quality rules, especially related to high level disinfection. Like we've seen a lot of that come up. But you're right. Um, Kind of finding that umbrella, if it fits good at the system SPD level, if it's in IP, if it's in quality, if it's some kind of system facility, a facility, or plant engineering support. Love that idea. That's another great takeaway here. So to pull all of this together, for the audience, what you're hearing is this water quality conversation is not going anywhere anytime soon. We got a lot of gaps, a lot of opportunities out there to fill in information, to inspire other folks in the industry, just like Anna said, who they're just waiting for that next big opportunity to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm passionate about that. I want to nerd out about that. And not only for my facility and my team and my patients, but I want to impact the whole country, the whole industry with my support, with my advocacy. I know Jameed and Angie and the team over at Advantage are really pushing, getting involved in the AMI, committees and the writing of the guidelines, et cetera. So there's just so many people to connect with through the Beyond Clean networks and even outside, all those experts that are out there talking and writing and teaching about water. So my takeaway and kind of wrap up here is don't wait. Just like Jameed said, get on it right now. Keep consuming information like this. You've spent your Friday nerding out with us about water all day, so I know that we're preaching to the choir, but the big takeaway from this section is it can't just be you. You're not going to be able to do this by yourself. You need a team. You need alignment across your department and across the industry. So let's get connected with each other and help each other accomplish this. I want to thank you, Jameed, Angie, and Anna, for your wonderful contributions to this panel today. This is a terrific wrap up to a terrific event. And I know we had a couple of questions that we didn't get to in the Q&A, one about disaster. So we'll send out information to you if you put that Q&A down there as well. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lindsay.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks to all of you panelists for being willing to share your insights, your expertise with the audience today. We have people tuning in from all over the world today, nerding out with us, as Hank mentioned, about water quality all day long. One takeaway that I had is that the Water Quality Conference 3.0 next year is definitely one that we'll have to start planning for, especially as ST108 gets released. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, sharing your Friday with us, and geeking out about water quality and all the issues and solutions that exist as we know them. We have so many great experts who were part of today's conference. So please, please, please reach out to them, connect with them on LinkedIn. They're here in this industry to support you and to be a resource for you. So I encourage you all, don't hesitate, send them a LinkedIn message, drop them a line via email, and definitely utilize their expertise to support your department. If you're anxiously awaiting your CE certificate, after I push end on this webcast, you will automatically be redirected to a conference survey. Please take some time. We would love to hear your thoughts about this conference, how we can make it better next time, and what else you would like to hear from us at future events. You'll be able to download your CE certificate directly from that survey. We encourage you all to keep fighting dirty. We know you do that day in and day out, and to that and for that, we are grateful. From Beyond Clean, from our partners at First Case, and certainly from our sponsor, Verda, we wish you all a wonderful weekend. And like I said before, we encourage you to keep fighting dirty. We'll talk to you all soon.